My son's wife told me I was embarrassing the photos at her wedding. Just like that. In front of everyone. Like I was some stain on her perfect day that needed to be hidden away. I stood there in my old Navy suit, the same one I'd worn to Marcus's college graduation, his law school ceremony, every milestone that mattered, and I watched my boy look down at his shoes. Couldn't even meet my eyes. The woman he'd just married had her hand on his arm, whispering something, and I knew right then that I'd lost him long before he said, "I do." The Seattle rain had cleared up just for their garden ceremony, sunlight breaking through like it was blessing them, but all I felt was cold. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people who should have made you feel tall, pull up a chair. This one's gonna hurt before it heals. Because today, I'm serving truth straight, no sugar. I ended up at a table in the far corner behind a decorative fountain where the catering staff kept passing by with confused looks, like they couldn't figure out why a guest was tucked away with the extra chairs and flower arrangements. My table card said Robert Miller. They couldn't even get my name right. I've been Bob my whole life. But I guess Bob wasn't fancy enough for the Sterling Miller wedding. And if you appreciate stories about dignity when the world tries to strip it away, go ahead and subscribe to Grandpa's Diaries. I've got plenty more where this came from, and I'm not going anywhere. I sat there with my hands folded on that white tablecloth, watching the champagne flow and the orchestra play, thinking about all the years I'd worked double shifts so Marcus could have piano lessons, thinking about the times I'd eaten cereal for dinner so he could have steak, thinking about how I'd sold everything I had to give him a future, and somehow ended up invisible in it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, hidden away like a secret, while everyone celebrated the union of two families. But they only meant one family, really, the Sterlings. The ones with the waterfront estate and the society connections and the last name that opened doors. My last name, Miller, was common as dirt, and I guess they thought I was too. But I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when I built things, created things, made things happen in the tech world before anyone called it that. A time when my ideas meant something, and my handshake was worth more than any contract. That version of me sat quiet in the corner now, sipping water because they'd forgotten to bring me champagne, watching my son dance with a woman who just erased me from his story. And the thing about being underestimated is this. Sometimes it's the most powerful position you can hold. Sometimes people don't see you coming until you're already there. Marcus wasn't always like this. I need you to understand that. The boy I raised had a heart bigger than Seattle itself. When he was 7, he used to save half his Halloween candy to give to kids at the shelter where I volunteered on Thanksgiving. He'd sit next to me on our worn couch, his little hand in mine, and tell me he was going to be a lawyer so he could help people like Dad does. I worked as a software engineer back in the early 90s, when the tech boom was just starting to rumble through the Pacific Northwest. Me and 2 other guys from the community college, Tom Jenkins and David Rodriguez, we had this crazy idea for data compression software. Worked on it in Tom's garage, surviving on pizza and dreams. By '94, we had something real, something valuable. Companies were interested. But then Sarah got sick. My wife Marcus's mom, the kindest soul you'd ever meet. Cancer came fast and mean, the kind that doesn't negotiate. The medical bills piled up faster than our little startup could handle. I had a choice to make. Hold on to my third of the company and hope it paid off someday. Or cash out my shares to save my wife and secure my son's future. I sold my stake for $75,000. Paid off the hospital bills. Bought us another 6 months with Sarah and put the rest in a college fund for Marcus. She died anyway, on a Tuesday morning in March, with both of us holding her hands. Marcus was 8 years old. After the funeral, he crawled into my lap and said, "It's okay, Dad. We still got each other." That's the boy I remember. I raised him alone after that. Worked my way up to senior engineer at a mid-size firm. Nothing fancy. Made enough to keep us comfortable in our small apartment in Greenwood. I taught Marcus how to tie a tie, how to treat women with respect, how to stand up for what's right even when it costs you something. Every parent thinks their kid is special, but Marcus actually was. Full scholarship to Stanford, top of his class at Georgetown Law. The pride I felt watching him walk across those stages, man, there aren't words for it. Somewhere along the way to becoming successful, though, he forgot where he came from. Or maybe he didn't forget. Maybe he just decided it wasn't the origin story he wanted anymore. When he started dating Victoria 3 years ago, I noticed the changes. He stopped calling as much, started correcting my grammar, bought me clothes I never asked for, with tags I was afraid to look at. "Dad, you gotta dress better if you're gonna meet Victoria's parents," he'd said, handing me a box from Nordstrom. I wore those clothes once, felt like I was in a costume. The next time I went back to my own closet. I'm 68 years old. I know who I am. I just wished my son still did. The first time I met Victoria's parents was at their estate in Medina, just across the lake from Seattle. Richard Sterling opened the door himself, unusual for a man who probably had staff for everything, and looked me up and down like I was there to deliver a package. His handshake was cold, the kind meant to establish dominance rather than welcome. Dinner was painful. Catherine Sterling asked what I did for a living, and when I said I was retired from software engineering, Richard actually laughed. Not a friendly chuckle, but something sharp and dismissive. "Software engineering," he repeated like I'd said I collected bottle caps. "Well, we can't all build empires, can we? Someone's got to write the code." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Just refilled his wine glass and changed the subject. Victoria barely looked at me all evening. When she did, it was with this expression I'd seen before. The look people give something they wish would disappear. After dessert, I overheard her talking to Marcus in the hallway. "Baby, I know he's your father, but does he have to dress like he's going to a job interview at Costco?" Marcus's response was too quiet to hear, but the fact that he responded at all, that he didn't defend me, that told me everything I needed to know. The invitations to family events became less frequent after that. When Marcus proposed to Victoria 6 months later, I found out through a Facebook post before he called me. He came by my apartment the next day, apologetic, saying things had been crazy busy, and he'd meant to tell me in person, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I knew the truth. He was embarrassed. Of me, of my small apartment with the second-hand furniture, of my old Civic parked on the street, of the life I'd lived to give him his. Thanksgiving that year, he told me the Sterlings were hosting and it was just going to be immediate family. I didn't ask where that left me. Christmas, he and Victoria went to Aspen with her parents. He sent me a card with a generic message and a gift card to Olive Garden. My son, who I'd taught to write thank you notes by hand, who used to make me birthday cards with crayon drawings, had reduced me to a restaurant chain gift card. The wedding invitation came in the mail, formal and impersonal. "Mr. Robert Miller," it said. They couldn't even use Bob. The envelope was thick, expensive, with some kind of wax seal. Inside, layers of cards explaining the dress code, black tie preferred, the registry, only high-end stores I'd never heard of, and the schedule, 3-day event at the Sterling estate. There was no note from Marcus, no phone call asking me to be his best man, or any kind of man in his wedding party at all. I was just another name on a list, another seat to fill. I sat at my kitchen table that night, holding that fancy invitation, and something inside me cracked just a little bit more. The wedding day was perfect if you care about that sort of thing. May sunshine, manicured gardens, white roses everywhere you looked. I'd driven myself to the Sterling estate in Medina, parked my old Civic between Mercedes and Teslas, and walked up to the entrance with my garment bag. Inside was my navy suit, the good one, the only one, pressed and ready. I'd even gotten a haircut that week, bought new shoes. I wanted Marcus to be proud of me, wanted to fit into his new world even if just for one day. The ceremony was scheduled for 4, and I arrived at 2 to help if needed. A wedding planner with a clipboard and a headset looked at me like I'd wandered in from the street. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she hoped the answer was no. When I explained I was the groom's father, her expression shifted to something worse than confusion, pity. She checked her list twice before finding my name, then directed me to a side entrance where the other guests are gathering. I should have known then, should have felt it coming, but I was still holding on to hope, still believing that when Marcus saw me, he'd smile that smile I remembered and everything would be okay. I found him in the groom's suite, surrounded by his groomsmen, college friends, law school buddies, Victoria's brother, all of them in matching tuxedos, laughing about something I'd missed. Marcus turned when I entered, and for just a second, one brief, beautiful second, I saw my son's face light up. Then Victoria walked in behind me. "Oh my God, Marcus, I thought we talked about this." Her voice cut through the room like glass. She looked at me, then at my garment bag, then back at Marcus. "He can't wear that. Tell me he's not wearing that to my wedding." My wedding. Not our wedding. Not their wedding. Hers. Marcus's face went red. "Victoria, it's fine. Dad looks fine." But his voice was weak, pleading rather than defending. She crossed the room in 3 sharp clicks of her heels, pulled him aside, and the whispered argument that followed might as well have been shouted. I heard embarrassing and photos and what will people think. I heard my son say, I know, but he's still my father." Still. Like that was somehow in question. Like I was holding onto the title by a thread. When they came back, Victoria's smile was plastic and bright. "Bob, hi. So glad you're here." She wasn't glad. "Listen, we have a small situation with the photographer. He needs the wedding party to be coordinated for the shots, and your suit is more navy? We were going for charcoal. So what we're thinking is maybe you could watch the ceremony from the garden terrace. It has a better view anyway. And then join us for the reception. Sound good?" It didn't sound good. It sounded like exile. But Marcus was nodding along, his eyes somewhere over my shoulder, unable or unwilling to look at his own father. And I realized right then, standing in that expensive room with those expensive people, that I'd already lost him. The wedding was just making it official. I watched my son get married from behind a decorative fountain, standing because all the chairs were taken. The garden terrace Victoria had mentioned as having a better view was actually where they'd stationed the catering staff and the backup sound equipment. I could barely see Marcus at the altar, just his profile when he turned slightly. I couldn't see his face when he said his vows. Couldn't see if he cried or smiled or looked happy. I was there, but I wasn't really there at all. After the ceremony, I thought maybe things would improve. Maybe I could find Marcus during the cocktail hour, congratulate him properly, take a photo together. But the wedding planner intercepted me again. That same clipboard, that same professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Miller, we have you seated at table 18. She guided me through the reception tent like I might get lost, past table after table of Marcus's colleagues and Victoria's society friends, past the Sterling family table right up front near the dance floor, all the way to the back corner. Table 18 was partially hidden behind the DJ booth and a large potted plant. My table mates were Victoria's hairdresser, the florist, and 3 people I never got the names of because they barely acknowledged I existed. I sat down and looked at the place card. Robert Miller in fancy calligraphy that somehow made my name look foreign. Around me, champagne flowed and laughter echoed and the band played Sinatra. I had a glass of water and a bread roll and the growing realization that I was not a guest at this wedding. I was an obligation fulfilled. A box checked. Father of the groom. Present. That's all they needed from me. The speeches started after dinner. Richard Sterling stood up, microphone in hand, and talked about Victoria like she was a precious gem he was reluctantly letting go of. He joked about Marcus marrying up, and everyone laughed. He talked about the Sterling family legacy, about building something that lasts, about the importance of choosing the right partner to carry on your values. He never once mentioned me, never acknowledged that Marcus had a family too, a history, a father who'd given up everything so he could stand in that tent in that tuxedo marrying into that legacy. Marcus's best man gave the next speech. More jokes, more stories from college and law school. Not a single memory that included me. No mention of where Marcus came from, who raised him, what sacrifices were made. It was like Marcus's life had started at 18 when he left for Stanford, and everything before that, all those years of just him and me against the world, had been erased. I thought about leaving, just standing up and walking out, getting in my Civic and driving back to my quiet apartment where at least I knew who I was. But something kept me in that chair. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe just the fading hope that my son would remember I existed and come find me. He never did. When the dancing started, I watched Marcus and Victoria's first dance from my spot behind the DJ booth. They looked happy. They looked perfect. They looked like they belonged in this world of wealth and status and careful social climbing. And me? I looked like what I was, a man who didn't fit into his own son's story anymore. I stayed until the end, though. Watched them cut the cake. Watched them toss the bouquet and garter. Watched my son start his new life without looking back once to see if I was still there. I was. I always was. But it didn't seem to matter anymore. What Victoria and Richard Sterling didn't know, what nobody except my lawyer and my accountant knew, was that I wasn't just some retired software engineer living on a modest pension. Remember that startup I mentioned? The one I sold my shares in back in '94 for $75,000? Techdyne Solutions. You might have heard of them. They went public in '98. By 2000, they were worth billions. Tom Jenkins, my old garage partner, never forgot what I'd done. While I was raising Marcus and working my regular job, Tom had been building Techdyne into something massive. Every year on Marcus's birthday, Tom would call me. Every year he'd say the same thing. "You should have stayed, Bob. We could have made you rich." But I never regretted my choice. Money couldn't have saved Sarah, but at least I tried. At least Marcus got to keep our house for a few more months with his mom in it. That was worth more than any fortune. In 2012, Tom called with a different message. He was retiring, selling his majority stake, and he wanted me to know something. Back when I'd sold my shares, he and David had made a pact. They'd bought my shares between them, but they'd kept them registered in my name as a trust for Marcus. For when he turns 30, Tom had said, or for whatever you need them for. They're yours, Bob. They always were. I'd hung up the phone that day and cried like I hadn't cried since Sarah died. I didn't touch those shares, watched them grow, split, grow again. When Marcus turned 30, I'd planned to sign them over to him, set him up for life, show him that his old man had done something right after all. But by then, he was already pulling away, already embarrassed by me, already choosing Victoria's world over mine. So I held on to them. And last year, when Techdyne got acquired by a larger firm, those shares converted to cash, $28 million, from a $75,000 sacrifice made 30 years ago. My financial advisor, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, had been managing my investments quietly for years. When the Techdyne money hit, she came to me with opportunities. Real estate mostly. Commercial properties, office buildings, a few struggling companies that needed capital injection. One of those companies was Sterling Real Estate Holdings, Richard's empire. It wasn't as solid as it looked from the outside. Over-leveraged, bad investments in the commercial sector right before the pandemic, loans coming due. They needed a cash infusion fast, and they needed it quietly so investors wouldn't panic. Patricia structured it through 3 different LLCs. Richard Sterling never knew who was buying up his debt, who was becoming the majority stakeholder in his precious company. He just knew someone had saved him from bankruptcy and that someone now owned 51% of Sterling Real Estate Holdings. The paperwork was finalized 2 weeks before the wedding. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because it was a good investment. Because Patricia said the company had bones. It just needed better management. Because sometimes the best decisions are the ones you make with your head, not your heart. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something when I signed those papers. Not satisfaction exactly. More like a quiet sense that the universe has a strange way of balancing scales. I was sitting at table 18 watching Marcus dance with his new wife when Richard Sterling's phone rang. I saw him excuse himself from the head table, saw him walk toward the house with that phone pressed to his ear, saw his face change from confusion to shock to something that looked a lot like fear. He was on that call for 10 minutes. When he came back, he looked like a man who'd just seen a ghost. His eyes scanned the reception tent, searching. And then they landed on me, on the old man in the navy suit sitting behind the DJ booth, and I watched him put it all together. Richard Sterling walked toward my table like a man in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. His face had gone pale under his expensive tan, and his hand was still gripping his phone like it might ring again with different news, better news, news that would tell him this was all a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. The universe doesn't make those kinds of errors. "Mr. Miller," he said when he reached me, and the Mr. carried a weight it hadn't held at that dinner in Medina. "Bob, may I speak with you privately?" Around us the wedding continued. Nobody noticed the father of the bride pulling the hidden father of the groom aside. We walked to a quiet corner of the garden, away from the music and the laughter. Richard looked at me differently now, seeing me for the first time. My attorney just informed me about the ownership structure of my company. He said the new majority stakeholder is someone named Robert Miller, operating through. I raised my hand gently. It's just business, Richard. Patricia Chen handles my investments. She said your company had good bones, just needed some capital. I trust her judgment. He stared at me. This man who'd laughed at my career, who'd allowed his daughter to exile me to the back of my own son's wedding. You're telling me you own my company? You? The disbelief in his voice might have stung once. Now it just sounded hollow. I own 51% of it. You still run it day to day. Nothing has to change, unless you want it to. The implications hung between us like smoke. His whole world had just shifted, and we both knew it. I could have been cruel then, could have twisted the knife, made demands, humiliated him the way his daughter had humiliated me. But that's not who I am. That's not who Sarah raised Marcus to be, even if he forgot it. I left the wedding shortly after that. Didn't say goodbye to Marcus, didn't seek out Victoria for some dramatic confrontation. Just walked to my Civic, drove back across the bridge to Seattle, and went home to my quiet apartment. The next morning, Marcus called. First time in 3 months I'd heard his voice on the phone rather than through text. Dad, we need to talk. His voice was tight, stressed. Behind him I could hear Victoria's sharp tones, hear Richard's deeper voice. They'd figured it out. The whole family gathered around Marcus's phone, trying to understand how the embarrassing old man had become the one holding all the cards. Sure, son. Come by anytime. You know where I live. I kept my voice gentle, like I always had. He came that afternoon, alone. Sat on my old couch, looked around at my modest life, and finally, met my eyes. Why didn't you tell me? About the money, about Techdyne, about everything. I poured us both coffee in mismatched mugs. Would it have changed anything? Would you have defended me yesterday if you'd known I was rich? Because that's not really the kind of defense I was looking for, Marcus. He didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence for a long time, my boy and me, with 30 years of love and 3 years of distance between us. Finally, he said, I'm sorry, Dad, for yesterday, for everything. It was a start. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the wall he'd built. I told him about his mom then, about selling my shares to give us 6 more months with her, about choosing him over wealth every single time, about how real love isn't measured in stock portfolios or real estate holdings, but in the sacrifices you don't regret making. You raise your kids for the world, Marcus, but you hope the world doesn't take them so far they forget where home is. The truth is, I didn't buy Richard Sterling's company for revenge. I bought it because it was a good investment. But life has a funny way of teaching lessons when you're not looking for them. Victoria's father learned that money doesn't make you better than anyone. It just makes you responsible for more. Marcus learned that the father he'd hidden in the corner had been carrying more weight than anyone knew. And me? I learned that you can lose your place in someone's story, but still know your worth. That dignity isn't given by others. It's something you carry yourself even when nobody's watching. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been underestimated or overlooked by people who should have known better, drop a comment below. Tell me your story. And don't forget to subscribe to Grandpa's Diaries. I've got a lot more memories to share, and some of them even have happy endings. This one? Well, Marcus and I are still working on it, but we're working on it together. And that's something.